Hey everyone, Jim Coventry from Roto Wire here. Wild card weekend is coming up. Usually I'll be looking all over the place. I've got Instagram on one side, I've got Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook on another. So apologies in advance for looking around. Hey, excited to talk with everybody some NFL football. Now, a few programming notes, of course. Start out by saying lots of information to get out this week. We'll have prop bets. We'll talk about some of that in this show for sure, but there are certainly going to be developments through threads, and I'll be posting those threads Friday and Saturday before the games kick off. Those will be at Jim Coventry NFL on Twitter. Now, if you're in a postseason fantasy league and you're not a RotoWire subscriber, I have my rankings up for the entire playoff slate, position by position. If you want to get free access to that, and if you're on Twitter, YouTube, it's right beneath you, rotowire.com/try. No credit card needed. Get behind a paywall a couple days, but you can check out my rankings for the playoffs, and I do some narrative there. Talk about how many games teams will win. If you're playing in these playoff challenge leagues, it's very important that you go through the bracket and you determine how many games you expect each team to play, because that is, it sounds obvious, but it's paramount. Count the games out. If you basically the teams that are one and done, be careful with the one and dones. NFL playoff preparation is hyper game plan specific. Now, this season, we saw a bit better of that during the regular season, but in the postseason, one-dimensional teams, you will see opponents do everything in their power to take that one dimension away and make the opponent beat them left-handed, so to speak. So be careful with that, because, if you got a team that's losing and I'm going to take their best player and get 25, 30 points out of them, not necessarily. That's the player who may not go off. Often it's the ancillary players in those games that have the light coverage and are able to do that fantasy football damage. Let's break these games on NFC today. Thursday, we will go through the AFC games. Saturday on these channels at 11:30 Eastern time, we will do the betting and prop betting show on this channel. All right, start out. Seahawks 49ers, Saturday, 4:35 Eastern kickoff. 49ers are currently a 9.5-point favorite. Over and under is 42.5. Now, the 49ers team total is 26.5, while the Seahawks is just 15.5. Now, these teams play twice, divisional opponents, but I want you to understand this. Even though the 49ers won both games very convincingly, the Seahawks may not have a lot to take away from the 49ers offense in terms of game planning. And here's the main thing. In the first meeting, which I believe was week 3, let me just check my notes here. It was week 2 or week 3. It was early. And in that game, it was week 2. In that game, Trey Lance was the starter. He went down in the first drive of the game with that broken leg, foot, whatever we had going on there. And then Jimmy Garoppolo came in. So that, and George Kittle did not play in that game. So in the running back, Elijah Mitchell got hurt in week 1. So Jeff Wilson was a starter. Wilson's not on the team anymore. Jimmy Garoppolo's not going to be playing, and Kittle's back. Now the second game, much later in the season, week 14. Oh, well, certainly they could take the Seahawks game, something from that game and move forward. Not necessarily. To a degree, Deebo Samuel was out. Now, Deebo Samuel is going to be a critical component of whatever playoff run the 49ers make. When they traded for Christian McCaffrey, I noted very quickly, we know Kyle Shanahan, and Kyle Shanahan is a master play crafter, and he stacks plays, sets up defenders. He has not been able to fully utilize the offensive plan that he envisioned, but he's had weeks to prepare for this. We will see things we have not seen before. So in that second meeting at Seattle, the Seahawks came in with a game plan defensively. They made it a point to overload the box to slow or stop Christian McCaffrey. Now, they didn't stop him, but they limited him. They held him, maybe it's 120 yards, 108 on the ground, but it took a lot of carries to get there. It took him a long time. And the 49ers didn't go off on the scoreboard. Now, while they were slowing him down, it was George Kittle who did the big damage with 2 touchdowns, I believe 90 yards receiving. And so now they come into this game. They can deal with one or the other. It's like, okay, do we do this to McCaffrey again? Are we willing to live with Kittle beating us? Maybe they are. They probably are. But now we add the Deebo Samuel piece in. Kyle Shanahan knows what the Seahawks saw. He will have contingencies with all 3 of these players, and whichever look the defense is showing, the Seahawks are not a very good defense. They have good components on certain parts of the defense, and we'll talk about those in the breakdown. But they are going to be completely overmatched by the talent the 49ers offense brings into this game. Now, on the other side of the ball, the 49ers are eminently prepared to deal with the Seahawks. They saw in that Week 14 game, the 2 rookie tackles, Cross and, oh my gosh, why? And Abe Lucas and Charles Cross. Basically, Joey Bosa, Nick Bosa was in that backfield. Man, he blew up Teddy. Man, I'm screwing up the names, guys. I'm calling Geno Smith Teddy Bridgewater. Not my banner day. The content's here, though. The content is here. So Geno Smith was in trouble in that game. And now the 2 tackles, Eric Armstead and Javon Kinlaw. Now, they've been back in life, but they are getting healthier by the week. They're still on the injury report, but having those guys closer to full health is huge for the 49ers. Well, all right, let's go into more of the Seattle offense as we get to what these are going to do. But those 2 tackles are going to allow them to stunt more. Bosa is going to allow openings for the other defenders and for the linebackers to add pressure. So this will be huge. So sorry about the cough here. In both of those games, Seattle was unable to get much of any downfield passing attack going. Too much pressure for the offensive line. Not that Seattle's a big strike team, but they can on occasion, but the time is not going to be there. So let's get into the Seattle offense. So first of all, trends. Geno Smith has 1 touchdown in 3 of his last 4 games. He's been held to 215 or fewer pass yards in each of his last 3 games. So he has been trending down. Now, he's played tough defenses. He had a weather game in Kansas City. They had a very tough match with the 49ers at one point, and the other game, and the Jets. Those were not easy matchups, but this is the type of matchup Geno's going to see. And Ken Walker has actually been playing very well, getting a ton of volume. 24 to 30 carries in the last 3 games. His rushing yardage over 100 in each game, and that's been great. DK Metcalf, again, he's been very good, but he hasn't been a high-level fantasy producer. And so he doesn't have a touchdown in his last 4 games. Now, those are fickle, right? But it's not, like we said, with Geno Smith throwing so few touchdowns, obviously the result is your receivers aren't scoring touchdowns, right? And DK has 55 yards or fewer in 3 of his last 4 games. His 81-yard performance was since week 13 was his high watermark. So he has not been having big yardage, and he actually only has 200-yard games on the season. Now, Tyler Lockett has been a touchdown scorer, 7 touchdowns in his last 9 games. He's been over 70 yards only once since week 5. But he has 50 or more yards in 7 of his last games. So he's pretty much a 50 to 60-yard guy who can score touchdowns. But again, he's with the offensive line not being as good as it looked early in the season. They're just not getting him in the explosives. So basically, when we look at this right now, we are going to break this game down. We'll start out with Seattle on offense, as we talk about. These are the players. Now what's going to happen? So we mentioned earlier, overall in the run game, we'll start here. The offensive line has performed at a below average level. I do take a lot of grades from Pro Football Focus on this. I watch the games myself. Sometimes I like to take my eye and the grades from Pro Football Focus to keep myself in check. When I disagree, I will make a point of that, but most of the time it's within my range, so I tend to utilize that as my standard. So now, the left side of the run blocking has been adequate. Charles Cross and Damian Lewis, the guard, have been quite good. They're weakest up the middle. Center Austin Blythe, right guard Gabe Jackson, they are terrible. And so the run game is predictable. If they want to get consistent runs, they've got to run to the left side. The run to the right, they're putting themselves at a disadvantage because their run blocking is typically poor. Now it's the tight end side often, so they get a little bit of a boost there, but the run blocking is not very good there. And The tackles overall are good. It's the interior, center, right guard. That's where the problem is. And the 49ers, the thing is, so they have the 4th best run defense in the league. And I mentioned earlier, Eric Armstead, Javon Kinlaw, they're getting healthier by the week. And they themselves are not the guys that are doing the great tackle work. They're not the guys who are putting up the big sack numbers. But they are very good football players that occupy offensive linemen. They allow Nick Bosa to use the stunts, loop underneath. The 2 defensive tackles keep the offensive line against so those linebackers can feast. And they have a great set of linebackers, 3 of them in San Francisco. So those guys healthy, it really complicates matters for the opposing offense. And that interior line we talked about, that is going to be a problem. All right, so we continue on now. We said earlier, not just the 4th best defense against run, but they allow the 2nd fewest fantasy points. And did you know the 49ers have not allowed a running back to hit 70 yards all season? Josh Jacobs hit 69 during the end of the season. That was it. High water mark all year. They are impossible to run consistently on. So I mentioned earlier, it's Kinlaw and Armstead, them healthier, really frees everybody out. Fred Warner, Azeez El-Shaair, and Dre Greenlaw are all well above average in run defense. And again, they're free-flowing, they're fast, they can stop running backs from getting to the outside. Just a wonderful unit. And so now when we go further on this, we're going to talk about now what is Seattle going to do. So realistically, I mentioned earlier, they have been running Ken Walker very, very heavily. I don't know how they do that here. You can't go into this game saying we are going to go into the teeth of this defense where we are overmatched and we're just going to take our chance with Ken Walker. Now, if you've watched Ken Walker, he's an excellent running back, but he's boom or bust. A lot of short runs. He breaks off a big run here and there. Those are nice for stats. Those are nice for prop betting and for fantasy, but they're not good for sustaining an NFL offense. You need to keep the down and distance reasonable. I don't believe if they're going to hammer Ken Walker into the line, they are frequently going to be in 2nd long and 3rd long. And when they're in that situation, the extra pressure the 49ers can deal up is going to mitigate their pass defense. So that takes us to the defense side, the pass defense side. So let's talk now the pass. We'll merge and integrate these all together. This will be a little bit longer of a show. We're going to break down 3 games today, but I'm going to give you the best I can. So Geno Smith, he has played like a top 10 quarterback this year. Now, in other years, that top 10 may not be quite the same. We had a lot of bad quarterback play this year, but Geno's been good. He runs Shane Waldron's offense very well. Timing and rhythm-based offense, get the ball out reasonably quick, and it has been very useful. He pilots that up. He's a very intelligent quarterback, one of the smarter quarterbacks in terms of reading that I've seen. You know, he's right there with the better ones, and Geno Smith's been excellent. And so now down the stretch, he's had a little bit of luck. He's thrown a number of passes that should have been intercepted, and he's gotten away with those. And that happens to all quarterbacks, but he's really kind of living on borrowed time because defenses are kind of picking up on what Waldron is doing right now. And they're trying. We saw in the recent matchup with the 49ers and the Seahawks, they were taking Charvarius Ward, and they were pressing him on DK Metcalf. And they made some connections, but everything was short. They couldn't get anything downfield because A, the pass rush was coming, and B, they were pressing, no free release. And so it was just gumming up the offense a little bit. Tyler Lockett did a little better. Later coverage. Charvarius Ward was kind of locked down on Metcalf, which helped them. So the tight ends, Colby Parkinson is kind of – so Disley gets hurt, done for the season. Parkinson kind of leapfrog Noah Fant. He's being used running more routes than Fant, but against this – 49ers defense, an elite tight end can get to them. The middling tight ends really have very little shot against them. And so this is not going to be advantageous for them. They probably need to run a lot of 2 tight end sets in this game to protect Geno Smith. Now, I do believe if they fall behind, DJ Dallas, and he isn't listed on the prop bets, but DJ Dallas is a good pass protector and a good receiver. And they will need to throw him screen passes to really give them an option, because the 49ers, if there's a place they struggle a little bit, they are not great this year. In the past, they've been great, but this year they have not been great at defending screens to the running backs. And so that is an area that they can attack a little bit. It doesn't result in tons of yardage. They get decent yardage, but that could overtake the run game using a heavy screen game. Even if they're 4 or 5 yards, it's better than the 1 or 2 they're going to get on the ground. So I do expect, if Pete Carroll and his staff, and Shane Waldron, of course, have studied this up, I do think they do put a high emphasis on the screen game. It also would eliminate some pass rush a little bit too, takes a little bit of the heat off of that. So that, I think that DJ Dallas, though, obviously, Kenneth Walker's their guy, but if they fall behind at all, we could see a lot of DJ Dallas. If a prop comes up for him, we'll talk later, and in receptions, they put like 2, you're going to go over that, because he is going to see some receptions in this game. All right, so the 49ers pass defense, they are vulnerable when the pass rush isn't getting home. They're a heavy zone team, top 10 in zone rate in the league. We said the pass rush, they're 6th in pressure rate. But they do give up the 9th most fantasy points to receivers. Now, quarterbacks, 12th fewest, but they give up completions. And a lot of them are short to intermediate completions. They don't give a lot of yardage after the catch frequently. So I do think Metcalf and Lockett are going to see high volume. They're going to get a good number of catches. I just don't think the yardage through the roof. Now, you understand, Lockett's a superior speed player. He can break a long one or get through defense at any time, and he'd make his day on a long play. Metcalf's the same, but for the most part, we're looking at mostly shorter completions. The safeties get in on the tackling. When you get in the middle of the field, that zone is very good at passing players off. So they are going to gang up and tackle people. So I don't think there's a lot of yardage here, but there'll be receptions. That'll be very important. Now, on the other side of the ball, when the 49ers have it, we mentioned earlier, the Seahawks are in a lot of trouble here. First of all, they have everybody now. They have Debo back. George Kittle's been fine, and Brandon Ayuk usage is weird. Christian McCaffrey. They have those 4 amazing and unique in some way weapons. And how Kyle Shanahan deploys them, he will change that from game. And we haven't even seen the full force. So this is going to be coming very, very quickly here. So when the 49ers are running the ball, they have a top 10 run blocking line. It's not the elite line we've seen in years past. Trent Williams is still elite as a run and a pass blocker, and right tackle Mike McGlinchey is a very good blocker. Interior is where they're a little bit weaker. Guards Aaron Banks and Spencer Burford, they're not good at all, but the 49ers are very good about being deceptive in their run game. And they will use motion. They will use many different bells and whistles to get around the overall deficiencies in the middle of the line. So they'll be fine there. And George Kittle is always able to block at an elite level as well. Helps them an awful lot here. So in terms of the Seattle run defense, now they're a middling run defense, but they're in the bottom half of the league in running back yards per carry. You can get to them. Now, they did lose Jordan Brooks a couple weeks ago. He was a big tackle machine for them, and there is a significant drop-off. He played in that last game against the 49ers, so this does not help them. That linebacker play is really important to their run defense. On the season, Seattle's given up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing running backs, and they give the 11th most receptions. So you can get to them a number of ways. Overall, they do get the support from their strong safety, Ryan Neal. He really helps shore up. But otherwise, unless the Seahawks sell out to stop the run, they're not stopping the run because they are not a good run defense in their base. And so that is the main thing we look at here. So they can choose to go after McCaffrey and slow him down. And I think they did that in the last game. I think they may, and take their chances with everybody else. But it is not going to be a winning battle, because as soon as they overcommit, Shanahan is going to pound them with Kittle, Ayuk, and Deebo Samuel. So I just do not see a route for them having a lot of success here. Now, in the passing game, the 49ers are interesting because it's like they pass when they feel like it, but if they don't need to, they're not going to pass a lot. And Brock Purdy, he could not be set up better for success with the weapons and the play calling. And he's been very good at seeing what's in front. Now, we've seen some bad throws he's gotten away with. And so that's been fortunate. So there is potential for him to make mistakes. But I think, again, with the full complement of weapons, the looks are amazing. In that last Seattle game, if you watch it, you'll remember. So he takes the drop back. He fakes a pass right, pulls it in, quickly turns around, fakes a pass left. Defense doesn't know what the heck to do. And then immediately, George Kittle is running down the middle of the field deep, and Purdy just lofts it over the top. Kittle grabs it out, runs everybody, touchdown. It was beautiful. It's just simple things like this because the defense has so much to worry about, and that was with no Deebo Samuel. You can do all types of crazy things. The defense has to respect them all. So this is a big problem for them. The 49ers pass protection is a little better than their run blocking. They're top 5 in pass protection. And so we said earlier, like right guard Spencer Burford, not a good run defender or blocker, but he's a good pass protector. So we'll see this with offensive linemen frequently. Sometimes they're good at one and not at the other. But and again, Trent Williams, we have him, and obviously an elite player there. That's huge. Now, Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle, we don't know what their usage is going to be. We see low usage a lot of weeks. When they need them, they use them. It's impossible to predict their performance because if the run game gets going with McCaffrey and if the short game gets going with Deebo, Kittle might get 3 targets. Ayuk might get 3 targets. If they're needed, Kittle gets behind the defense. We've seen him on 5 targets or less multiple times go for 80-plus yards and 2 touchdowns. So he doesn't need a lot to get there. So he's always going to be boom bust because the targets are going to be, they're low. They're not what we need them, but he's George Kittle. And so you love George Kittle. He'll if he gets the ball, he'll get it done, right? That's all we need to know. So it's a mismatch. It's a big mismatch. And the Seahawks, it's weird because they have the 10th worst pass defense, but for fantasy, they allow the 5th fewest points to wide receivers. But that's because their pass defense is a conglomerate. They can get beat by running backs in the receiving game. Christian McCaffrey. They can get killed by the tight ends. They're one of the worst tight end defenses in the league. So, and they have a bottom 10 pressure rate. So they're not getting pressure. You could beat them in the middle of the field. You could beat them on the edges, on the outside. At corner, Tariq Woolen's playing really well. Mike Jackson, not as well. He started the season well. He kind of regressed a bit. So Ayuk, it all depends how they use him, but I just don't think he sees a lot of targets. I don't think they need him a ton here. Can he get a big play? Of course he can. But no knock on him. I think he's one of the better receivers. I think he's outstanding. So, but again, Christian McCaffrey, the lethal weapon, it'll all start revolving around him. And however the Seahawks react to that, that's what we'll see. So in breaking the finals down on this game, and I know I'll move to the next one. I can't spend all day doing this. So when we do the narrative on this game, I just do not see a scenario where we are going to have the Seahawks hang with this offense. I know they say the third time they're meeting, whatever. This, like I mentioned earlier, this is not the same 49ers team. It's changed each time. The firepower is too much in offense. The Seahawks are too limited on their offense, while the 49ers know how to attack them, and they have attacked them well, and they have held them down twice. And there's no ace in the sleeve that Waldron's going to come up with and say, I'm going to trick the 49ers. He doesn't have that. There's nothing else he can show here. So I do feel comfortable laying the 9.5. I'm comfortable with that. I think the 49ers are in a class that is way beyond what the Seahawks are right now. And so I don't have an issue with that. All right, let's go to the Giants and the Vikings next. This is the Sunday game, 4:40 afternoon. Vikings now a 3-point favorite. They're at home. Over and under in this game is 48. Giants team total is 22.5, and the Vikings is 25.5. Now, they played a few weeks ago. It was a very, very weird game. Through 3 quarters, oh, man, I crapped out on the puck. Oh, good. I thought I was on a connection here. Good. All right. Thought I lost Instagram for a minute. Okay, perfect. So it was a low-scoring game through 3 quarters. This thing was 13-10 Giants, right? Nope, fourth quarter, 28 points fly on the board. So this ends up being a 27-24 shootout. Lead changes hands twice in the last couple of minutes. Greg Joseph kicks a long field goal to win this game with less than a minute left. Great, wild fourth quarter. But remember, it was 13-10 through 3 quarters. Sometimes games go off the rails. That happens, right? So now we got to figure out what's going to happen here. Now, in that game, the Giants had great success in the short and intermediate passing game. Daniel Jones had over 300 yards, 330. And it was, Richie James short and middle, and it wasn't deep shots for Slayton. It was more, middling stuff, and even Isaiah Hodgins was getting it done. They were just taking care of business. Saquon Barkley caught a ton of passes. We'll talk about him in a minute. Actually 8 catches on 10 targets. That's going to lead us to a prop because I will mention how Minnesota is very poor in defending receiving running backs, and obviously the Giants know that firsthand, and the prop we'll talk about later is very favorable. Now the Giants, they had no answers, especially in that fourth quarter, for Justin Jefferson. Some teams have. They had no answer. They had no answer for TJ Hockenson. They're a very bad defense against the tight end. They pretty much contained everything else, but at that point, they went off. Jefferson, 133 yards and touchdown. TJ Hockenson, 109 and 2 touchdowns. So they both had 16 targets. Now, it was a pass-happy attack for Kirk Cousins. 48 pass attempts. Dalvin Cook only runs it 14 times in this one. And again, it was a low-scoring game through 3 quarters. So let's talk about the Giants offense. First, here are the trends of the players going in. So Daniel Jones has been 200 or fewer yards in 4 of his last 5 games. What was the outlier? It was the game against Minnesota, where he threw for the 334. He's thrown 1 or fewer touchdown passes in 6 of his last 7. He runs, we know that, 34 or more yards in his last 3, at least 26 in his last 5. His prop is up around 40. It's a dangerous number to go because it's right at that cut point, right? He's run for 7 touchdowns. Now, Saquon Barkley, he's been held to 81 or fewer scrimmage yards in 5 of his last 7. But in those 2 games he didn't, it was at least 120 scrimmage yards. He scored in 6 of his last 9 games. Now, Darius Slayton, he was really hot for a while. It was like a big play or 2 every week. I think after enough film was out, teams have made a little more of a focus to stop him. He's now been held to 42 or fewer yards in 3 of his last 4 games. Now, before that, it was at least 58 yards in 7 of 8 games. So he definitely has had a down tick in production. Richie James in the slot has had 7 or 8 catches in 3 of his last 4 games. He's been a very useful part over the middle of the field for them. And, when he was with San Francisco, when I'd watch him on film, I really thought, he's a decent player. And, he just, whatever reason, didn't latch on. I think he was out of the league for a year. But he has been a good player when he's been called upon. 61 yards in 3 of his last 4 games, and he's actually had at least 41 in 6 of his last 7. So he has a good floor, good scoring floor. Now, Isaiah Hodgins, he's really been good in the red zone. That's where he's been getting it done. Touchdowns in 4 of his last 5, but 45 or fewer yards in all but 1 game he played. So he's not a yardage guy. Gets some yardage, of course. He's had at least 29 yards in every game he played more than 3 snaps, but he's like right between 29 and 45 yards. So it's good, but obviously not elite. But he scores a touchdown, certainly for fantasy, that works out really well. Now, here's the odd thing about Hodgins. He's only had more than 4 targets twice all year, so he's not heavily targeted. So he really has to be efficient with his opportunities. All right. Daniel Bellinger hasn't done a whole lot of much. 19 to 42 yards in 4 of his last 5 games. He hasn't scored a touchdown in 5. Now those are the player trends. Let's start out with, we'll go to the Minnesota. How do we start? I want to go to the Giants pass defense. I'm sorry. Our Giants pass offense. We'll start with that. So Jones has been a middling quarterback this year. How is he doing it? Play action. Brian Daboll has been awesome at dialing up high levels of play action. Defenses know they're going to run. They'll put in heavy personnel, dictate that the defense puts in more of a base package, less defensive backs, and then really in early downs, it's like 67% of the time they're going play action when they're going to throw. And that's huge because you freeze the linebackers. They're expecting run. Jones has been doing well. Brian Dable has given him the right buttons to press. And they leverage him in the running game. RPO, designed runs. Daniel Jones has been very good on it. Now, Saquon Barkley, we'll move back to Barkley in a minute. In terms of the Giants passing, as I mentioned, I already talked about the receivers earlier, and it's going to be that play action. That's what's going to get it done for them. They don't want to come out as a pass first team because that changes their identity. So we're going to see the run first look. They'll pass off of that. If they trail, you don't want them to be a team that has to throw, because if a defense knows they have to do that, that would take away the advantages that they have. Now, the good news is they have a great matchup against the Vikings defense here. The Vikings do play the second most zone coverage in the league, so it's almost 80% of the time. You know what you're getting. You know exactly what to expect, and you can game plan, and they just play them. So that's very, very helpful. Now, over the course of the season, the Vikings pass coverage has been a little below average, but recently they are bottoming out. They can't stop pretty much anybody right now. And the pressure rate has been decent. Their top 12 pressure rate on the season. So Darius Smith has been getting home. Danielle Hunter isn't quite the force he was a couple years back, but as a secondary pass rusher, he's doing very, very well. Now, the Vikings allow the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, the most fantasy points to wide receivers. And all three of those Giants receivers, they did well. They didn't blow up, but they did very well against the Vikings in that first matchup. Now, they are good against tight ends. Minnesota is. They allow the 7th fewest fantasy points to them. So overall, within the zone, you could pick when Chandon Sullivan's in the game. You could pick on him. He struggles in coverage at corner. He's a rotational player. Cam Bynum, the safety, you could pick on him. And Cam Dantzler, promise, but he's been nicked up and hurt, so he isn't quite playing at the level that we had seen flashes of. So there are players you can pick on there. Now, in the past, Minnesota's had very good linebacker coverage. Not this year. They are not covering well at all. So basically, you can attack Minnesota, and that's why, like Richie James over the middle, you get into that linebacker area. However reason they're good against tight ends, running backs out of the backfield. That's where the linebacking coverage hurts them. That's where it manifests most. That's why you have running backs 6 to 8 catches against them. Very routinely seeing teams attack that, and the Giants will attack that, right? So in the passing game, I expect to see a lot of Barkley in the screen game, a lot of Richie James in the slot, and the occasional shot to stretch the defense of Darius Slayton. And who got an alarm? I'm sorry about that. Okay, good. Hopefully there's probably a stupid timer on that. Okay. All right, hopefully I didn't lose everybody here. Okay, let's go back here. So now when the Giants want to run the ball, their run blocking is above average. And it mostly has to do, though, not with their offensive line. I mentioned earlier, they'll use heavy personnel. Sometimes use 2 running backs, sometimes use 2 tight ends, and they use the RPO. And so that actually masks things. So the run blocking looks better than the sum of its parts. And it is, because the line itself has 3 literal weak links. Left guard, Nick Gates, center John Feliciano, and Evan Neal, the rookie. They have all been very bad in run blocking. Now, Andrew Thomas on the left tackle is elite. Mark Lewinsky, who had come over from Indianapolis, bad in pass pro, but very effective as a run blocker. So again, it's the scheme that works here. And with the Vikings run defense, over the course of the season, it's been like what we call a shutdown unit, like top 2. But they are slipping lately. In the second half of the season, the whole season is one thing. They are not the same defense they were earlier in the season. They are getting gashed for much higher yards per carry than they were. They give up the 3rd most receptions to running backs, the 9th most receiving yards. So realistically, this was a very good run defense, but they are now struggling. And this is a good matchup for Saquon Barkley. Now, odds are the Vikings will try to aggressively put an extra player in the box, try to load up to stop Barkley and make Daniel Jones beat them, thinking that even though he threw for 334 yards the last time, thinking we're willing to tempt fate. We think that Jones is less likely to beat us than Saquon Barkley is. So I do think there's a chance where Barkley gets it done as a receiver, but maybe not as a runner, because I do think that becomes a focal point of the game. The other side of the ball, the Vikings are a tough call here because we don't know what we're getting week to week from them. So Kirk Cousins, 1 or fewer touchdowns in 4 of his last 8 full games. He's had 3 implosion games in his last 7. Now, the Jets were tough. Dallas was tough. Green Bay, I don't know what happened there, but he had 3 legitimate implosion games. But yet he's had other games in 5 of his last 8 full games, 299 yards. And he's had multiple touchdowns in 3 of his last 4 full games. So he is what we call the boom or bust quarterback. And you don't know what you're getting week to week. And I know all the narratives out there. This is obviously a playoff game. It's a big stage game. His history in big stage games has not been great. Now, I'm going to go over the players, the recent trends, and then we'll kind of talk about the breakdowns from there. Dalvin Cook, 37 or fewer rush yards in 3 of his last 5 games. Now, some of that's been game script. They'd fall behind and they wouldn't use him as much. So there's that. But he only has 200-yard games on the season and none since week 10. Now, he's been at least 80 yards 7 times this year, and he's scored in 9 games. But this is not the same Dalvin Cook we've seen in the past. He is not consistently explosive, occasionally explosive. And it's not enough to sustain offense. That's been a problem. They are not getting that sustaining running game. Now, of course, Justin Jefferson, I don't need to add anything about him. Now, he's had some down games. He had the 1 for 15 against Green Bay, the 3 for 33 against Dallas when they got blown out. So he's had the occasional poor game. But, I mean, my goodness, he's had at least 107 yards in 9 of his last 13 games, scored in 6 of his last 10. So we know, obviously, you don't need to talk about Justin Jefferson. Now, Adam Thielen's interesting. I think he might be in steep decline during the season. Earlier in the season, he was like a high floor guy, getting like 60 yards in games. He consistently putting up yardage. He has fewer than 17 yards in his last 3, 41 or less in 6 of his last 8. This is not the same Adam Thielen that we had earlier in the year. Now, he still scores 4 touchdowns in his last 7, 9 touchdowns here. He's excellent in the red zone. Doesn't require him not to have lost a step there. He's just got to, be available, get open, know where the spot in the zone are. And he has that chemistry in the red zone. So he's always a guy that can score your touchdown for you. So you've got that going. Now, KJ Osborne, it's interesting. We remember he had that one crazy game against Indianapolis when they were down 30 whatever points and they came back and won and he just lit the roof off. But he's actually been outproducing Thielen recently. Whereas Thielen's been held to 41 or fewer yards in 6 of his last 8. Osborne has 59 or more in 3 of his last 4. And he's had 40, but he's had 41 or fewer in all but 4 games. So anyway, he is a bit boom or bust. Not the 1-week boom that he had in Indianapolis. That's unrealistic. But he has scored in 3 of his last 5 games. So he's becoming a little bit more of a factor. He's not a super fantasy option, but I think he is a player who could pop up here in a good matchup, especially if the Giants, and we'll talk about this in a minute, foolishly try to overinvest in stopping Justin Jefferson. Now, TJ Hawkinson, he's been a great acquisition for them. 59 or more yards in 3 of his last 4 games. He gets 8 or more targets in most of his games. So he has just been a big part of that offense. So when the Vikings have the ball in the run game, they're run blocking, number 6 in the league. Now they just lost their right tackle, Brian O'Neill, to injured reserve, and he is an elite run blocker. He will be missed. And small sample size, Oliuo has taken over for him, and he's done well in a small sample size, but we don't know if that's just happened to be a game or 2 where he's done okay. That could be a big problem. Now, Christian Darrisaw on the left is very, very good. And the interior line, it's had a little bit of ups and downs. Right guard Ed Ingram is done very well, but they've had other issues. Garrett Bradbury's been hurt. Now, if he plays this week, he's been a very good blocker. This is a good run blocking line. Overall, it is a good run blocking line. I would say this. There are no weak links in the run blocking unit. So that's going to be important. The problem I said earlier, Dalvin Cook has simply not been explosive. Now, the Giants, they're a bottom 5 run defense. They give the 12th most fantasy points to running backs, and they don't give up a lot of receptions. 7th fewest receptions in the league to running backs. And this is a unit, though, if you are attacking them with the run, you can have success. But the problem with Dalvin Cook, as I said, he hasn't been a sustaining chain mover. And so it's a disjointing effect on the offense when, 1 yard, 2 yards, 8 yards. Well, the 8 yard comes on the next drive because you were 3rd and long. So they almost have to go pass heavy to have a chance, but then it's a matter of you're rolling the dice with Cousins. So let's go to the passing game now. So look, you don't know what you're getting Cousins. I said is week to week. We all know that, right? But they have Justin Jefferson, and they need to get him involved early and often. The coaching staff some weeks has done that. Other weeks, to their dismay, they haven't. Now, realistically, I mentioned how Adam Thielen seems to be sliding a bit. Doesn't seem to really have he's lost a step. Hawkinson's their number 2 receiver. But the problem is when you have a team bracketing or putting extra attention on Justin Jefferson, you need the other receiver to run routes that scare the defense. Hawkins is running tight end routes. Teams are willing to give those up. And so that's why teams for those games can have that success with Jefferson on occasion. But like we said, it's a matter of the game plan going in this game and saying, we're going to get him going. And if they do, nobody's stopping Justin Jefferson. So the Giants allow the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks, the 7th most to receivers, and the 4th most to tight ends. You pretty much could pick your way that you want to attack them. And with the personnel they have, if they're game planning this game right, they are going through Jefferson and Hawkinson, and they are saying, stop us. And until you do, this is where we're going. Occasionally, KJ Osborne involved. If they decide to get Cook involved as a receiver, that might be useful. But they do have talent. It's just a matter of Cousins shows up here. Now, the pass protection for the Vikings, it's been a little iffy in the middle. Hey, I'm sorry, I got the stupid alarm, and I wish I could get rid of this thing. I think we're off here. Let's see if we can get back here now. I think that's going to be done now. All right, hopefully we're good now. Okay. Sorry about that. So let's go back to this now. So overall, Christian Darrisaw, the left tackle, has been great. Now, mentioned earlier, Brian O'Neill out. That's where the problem is going to hit because he was elite. The middle, though, you can really get to this group in the middle. Both of the guards, Ezra Cleveland and Ed Ingram, they are just bad pass protectors. Now, fortunately, the best pass rusher right now for the Giants, well, 2 of them. You've got Dexter Lawrence and you've got Kayvon Thibodeau. Now, Lawrence is going to eat up the middle. That's going to be probably, I don't know what they're going to do to solve that problem, but they should be able to handle Thibodeau. So at least you don't have the double-edged sword where, they both are going to get it. I think they're going to be okay with Thibodeau. I think Dexter Lawrence is going to cause some problems for Kirk Cousins in this game. So getting the ball out somewhat quickly, which works for Hawkinson and Jefferson, that actually works. All right. Now, overall thoughts on this game. I think overall, when we get into this game, we are going to look at the offense and we are going to say that the Giants have to use Barkley in the screen game. I think that might be the most important thing that they do in this game. They're going to have to get him involved there. And as I think about it further, Richie James in the slot has been useful, but they're going to have to win with what they do best. It's going to have to be the RPO game. It's going to be Daniel Jones getting going. It's going to be Barkley in the screen game. And then when opportunities in the passing game open up, they're able to do that. That's what they're going to have to do. Now, the Vikings on offense, I said it earlier, they've got to feature like they did in the last game, but they didn't do it till late. Jefferson and Hawkinson, they have to use them and take advantage of that. If they go away from that too much, too many punts come into play here. Now, prop bets in this game, and I didn't do the props for the last game, and I got to just get those for you. Barkley has a prop of 3.5 receptions. Jump on that when this show is over. He should catch at least 5 passes in this game. Justin Jefferson has a 91.5 yard and a 6.5 reception total. And TJ Hawkinson, 47.5 yards and a 4.5 reception total. Either worst case scenario, 2 of the 4 come in. Best case scenario, all 4 come in. So if you bet the over on Jefferson yardage and receptions, you can do one or the other. Hockenson yardage and receptions. Like I said, it could be a clean sweep, but it's not going over 4. It might go 2 for 4 if it doesn't work out. So the worst case is you're splitting, but I really believe the best case is you're going over. And then Barkley, that's the one I see on the other end. In terms of the game here, look, this is a tough one to call. Both teams have a lot of issues. I do think that we have an opportunity. The Vikings are at home. They do have more talent. They're laying 3. And I do think that Justin Jefferson is the difference in this game. I am going with the over. I think that both of these teams are not going to be able to stop each other. Now, I know I did cover the game between the 49ers and the Seahawks. I did want to point out a couple props on this game. So let me just see if I had them listed here. And I may not have. Let me see here. So in Geno, let me see. So DK Metcalf, 4.5 receptions. He's going over that. He should have 6 or 7 here, maybe even 8. Tyler Lockett has 4.5. And I'm going to say the same thing I said with the 2 receivers from Minnesota, Hockenson and Jefferson, tight end and receiver, of course. But the worst case scenario is one of those receivers goes over. They likely both go over their reception prop. And it's likely 2 for 2. Worst case scenario, one goes over, one doesn't. They're not going to have a game where Metcalf or Lockett don't have 5 catches. So that's what we're looking at. And then if you Noah Fant under 27.5 yards, Colby Parkinson is taking work away from him, and Fant has been trending down, and it's a tough defense against tight ends. Those are the props I like in that game. And then I said earlier, you're going to lay the points at the 49ers. All right, last game here. We get the Monday Nighter. We got Dallas and the Bucs. So when we look at this game, the Cowboys are now 2.5-point favorites. It was 3 earlier, 45.5 over and under on this. So when Dallas is on offense, we'll start out with the skill position on the offense of passing attack here. Tampa Bay plays the 5th highest rated zone almost 80% of the time. That'll be good for CeeDee Lamb. Ultimately best for him. And Dak and the bottom 4 pressure rate. They have not been a high pressure team this year. So that's good for Dallas. Now Dak Prescott, 2 to 3 touchdowns in 8 of his last 10 games. He hasn't had a 0. He always throws a touchdown pass. He has 280 or more yards in 3 of his last 5 games, but he only has those 3 big yards a game of 280 in his 11 games played. So most of his games are under 280. He's not been a big yardage producer. Now, CeeDee Lamb has been coming on very strong lately. 100 yards in 3 of his last 4 games, at least 50 in 6 of his last 7. He gets at least 6 targets in every game, but he's had 11 in 4 of his last 9 games. So he has those spike target games, and he scored in 5 of his last 9. Michael Gallup has been trending down, 40 or fewer yards in his last 6 games. He's only had 49 yards over that once in week 12. He has a 63-yard game. That's been it. And so he is not. And Noah Brown is going to lose snaps as T.Y. Hilton continues to integrate in the offense. He's had 10 or fewer yards, Noah Brown has, in his last 3, and he's had 10 or fewer yards in 7 of his last 12. So that's not looking good. Now, T.Y. Hilton is coming on. It's not been a lot, but he had a 52-yard catch in his first game. He went 4 for 50 on 5 targets in a second, and then he only went 2 for 19 on 4 targets in the whitewash against when they got crushed against the Commanders. So not good there. But otherwise, Hilton is looking good here. Now, Schultz has been more of a floor player. And now he gets the touchdowns. We know that's the upside, right? Because he is very good against zone. When he gets in the red zone, he's very useful there. But he's had 30 or more yards in 6 of his last 7. The yardage hasn't been high. 4 or fewer catches in 6 of his last 8. So he really needs a touchdown to come through here. So when Dallas is facing this defense, now the Dallas offensive line isn't quite what it was. So they had that great line. It's now a line that is not dominating anymore. Now, Tyron Smith gets healthier each week. That certainly can help them. And so they're hopeful for that. But otherwise, they're fortunate that Tampa doesn't get a high pressure rate. So they should have time to throw. And Tampa, they may be top 7 against the pass, but they play all that zone. And so this is perfect for CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb runs a lot of his routes in the slot. He should have plenty of room to get open. It's really, you're not worried. Michael Gallup, so what? Neutralize him out with the outside corner. T.Y. Hilton, I think they'll selectively take deep shots with him, and I think they'll have some success in that because he's still running by people. And on limited snaps, he's still fresh. So I think that's very real possibility here. Now, in the run game, Dallas, they're a middling offensive line in the run game. They're only top 11 in the run blocking. Again, Tyron Smith, we're hoping he gets better each week if that helps. Now, Tyler Biadasz, their center, suffered a high ankle sprain a couple of weeks ago. We'll see on his status, but they really would need him. Now, the Bucs haven't been a great run defense this year. They're just a little bit below average. Vita Vea not playing to his normal standards, been nicked up this year. Akeem Hicks aging. I know Warren Sharp points out stats about him in the lineup, but honestly, Akeem Hicks has not been a difference maker this year, getting a little older in his career. Now, to running backs, they allow the 9th fewest receptions and the 4th fewest yards. So they'll give up some catches. They don't give up much yardage in the screen game. They do give up the 13th most fantasy points to running backs. Now, Ezekiel Elliott, 15 to 19 carries in 8 of his last 9 games. So he has been the heavy carry guy. But his yardage, 37 to 77 in weeks 13 through 70. So he has not been a big yardage option. And he's not getting receiving yardage. 1 game over 20 yards all year. That's it. Now he scores. Last week he didn't score, broke a 9-game streak in which he found the end zone. So there's that. Now Tony Pollard, 7 to 12 carries in 4 of his last 5 games. So his touches have gone down. I mean, now he's been nicked up too. All right. And he's only had 19 to 42 rushing yards in 3 of his last 4 games. And the receiving has been inconsistent. In the majority of his last 9 games, 6 of those games under 20 yards. He had a spike game. He went off as an outside receiver against Philadelphia with 109 yards. But again, he had a great year. But lately down the stretch, I think he's getting nicked up, and I think that's been a problem. So I do think the Cowboys are going to come out and try to run. I do think that they don't want to put on Dak's shoulders. Dak hasn't been that guy this year. I do think Zeke is going to have some success. They're going to try to shorten this game and run the ball. Hopefully Pollard could chip in and do well also. But I think that's the route they're going to go. Now, when they're passing, well, I mentioned earlier, they're going to have to lean on Lamb. That's going to be their way. So we go to the other side now where the Bucs have the ball. Brady's catching a lot of grief. But overall, he's been getting better down the stretch. And their offensive line was much maligned in the offseason. They've been a top 4 in pass protection line. So they're definitely keeping him clean. And they have turned it over to the being pass heavy. He's had at least 43 pass attempts in 9 of his last 10 games. So they are airing it out a lot, which is good. Earlier, and I know his pass attempts, were similar for much of the season, but they're running less. And that's good. They're running a little less because the run blocking is terrible. Now, Dallas, they're in the middle of the league with zone and man. They play zone about 25% of the – I'm sorry, they play man about 25% of the time. So they're in about the middle range of the league, but they're mostly zone. So that's fine there. Dallas is middling in their pass D, but they've had injuries. And that's not as good as a pass unit as it once was. They give up the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. And then they also have struggles in that they give the 2nd most fantasy points to wide receivers. They're good against tight ends. They're bottom, 10th fewest. So they're okay there. The pressure rate on the season, they're 2nd, but it's been inconsistent down the stretch. They really have to be laser focused in their game plan. They really have to make sure they're leveraging Micah Parsons because sometimes they'll put him in coverage, and I wonder what the heck are they thinking. But they're going to have to weaponize him, and they're also going to have to stay out of favorable situations for the opposing team to run. Now, getting Leighton Vander Esch, the middle linebacker back, that should help them this week. They've missed him for a few weeks with a shoulder injury. So let's go to the players now. Tom Brady. He's thrown at least 2 touchdowns in 5 of his last 7 games. Now, remember, he only had a single multi-touchdown game in his first 9. And also, he's had at least 281 yards in his last 3 full games. In 4 of his last 5, he had only gone over 280 yards 3 times in the first 10 games. So it is a very different production level of Brady between the first half and the second half. Now, he's not dominant, and he's not putting 30 points on the board. Matter of fact, they very rarely score 23 in a game. Against the Panthers, they did. But it's like since the week 10, that was like the only time they hit that many points. So Mike Evans, it's been, other than that week he went off, it's been a rough season. But he had that eruption game against Carolina, and now he has 83 yards in 2 of his last 3. But on the other hand, he has 60 or fewer yards in 6 of his last 8. So there's downside. He's only scored in 3 different games this year. Now it's 6 touchdowns, a 3, a 2, and a 1. He gets targets, at least 8 in 5 of his last 6 games. And Chris Godwin, he just hasn't had the great yardage in most games. He's had at least 54 yards in his last 8 games, but he hasn't had the ceiling games that we like. He's getting 8+ targets in 11 of his last 12 games, so he's fine with that. He gets at least 6 receptions in every game since week 5, but he's only scored once in his last 6. So we got that. And Cade Otton hasn't been good. He had a little stretch where he looked like he'd be a deal. He hasn't hit 20 yards in 4 games. 20 yards or fewer in his last 4 games, fewer than 30 in his last 7. So he hasn't been much of a deal for them. Now, the run game for the Bucs, we said the pass pro was good. Not so much in the run blocking. They're bottom 8. They are not getting it done in the run blocking. The interior line is a big problem. Right tackles or left tackle Donovan Smith's a big problem in the run game. He's good pass protection, but not in the run game. So basically, this is something where they don't have an advantage. And they learned. They were running on early downs behind this bad line, and they were finding themselves in 2nd and long and 3rd and long, and they finally started to back off a little bit. Now, Dallas, their yards per carry has gotten a lot worse. Now, Van Der Esch is out. It has a lot to do with that. So they were, with the yards per carry going up, they were top 5 in yards per carry, and I think they're closer to that with Van Der Esch back. He makes a big difference on the entirety of that defense. Dallas is a bottom 11 run defense, but they only allow the 8th fewest fantasy points to running backs. Again, having Van Der Esch back is a big deal. Now, Leonard Fournette, 10 carries or fewer in 3 of his last 4. And he gets at least 7 targets, though, in 3 of his last 5, and he never gets less than 4. So he'll be targeted there. At least 74 scrimmage yards in 3 of his last 5. And he only went over 81 once. That's when he blew up against the bad Arizona defense. Now, Rachaad White, he's phasing down a little bit. 11 or fewer carries with a max of 13, 4 of his last 5 games. 43 or more scrimmage yards in his last 5. So he's got that. But he hasn't had more than 77 yards in that same period. So that's been a problem. So that's been it. So when we look overall on this game, I said earlier, other than week 17 against Carolina, they haven't scored 23 points in a game since midseason. Their pass protection should hold up against the Dallas pass rush. Now, Godwin, he should be the featured receiver. Dallas plays about 75% zone. They are weak in the slot. There's definitely a mark to be had there. Godwin's going to be the zone buster. I think that's going to be great there. I think with Evans being hit or miss, I still think Dallas is going to put a little help on that side. And I think that Evans is probably unlikely to have a big game here. And I do think that the running game is not going to get going. They don't use it as much, and it isn't an effective running game. I think Dallas is going to force him to the screens to the back. Fournette should be involved there. Godwin should be involved in the short area. I think they're going to force them to do that. And the Bucs have broken down more than not with that. So that's probably what we're looking at. And I mentioned earlier with the Cowboys in offense. It's going to be CeeDee Lamb in the middle of the field, Ezekiel Elliott, hoping they could sustain a running game and shorten it. And Tampa has done a little worse against the rugged type backs like Elliott. So that's going to be useful for them. Shot plays to T.Y. Hilton, that he could be a wild card in this game. If I'm betting props, CeeDee Lamb either over 6.5 receptions or over 75.5 yards. I think both are good. Godwin should go over his yardage total. Tom Brady over 42.5 pass attempts. He probably gets 48 to 50 here. And then Cade Otton under 22.5 yards. This game is 2.5 on the line. It's going to be a tough call here. I would take the 2.5 points of the Bucs, knowing the Cowboys could win by 1 or 2. The Bucs could win this game. The points make a difference. I don't like the coaching on either side. I do think Dallas doesn't hit their 23.5 point team total. I would bet the under on that. Well, thanks for hanging with me. This was a long show. Broke down 3 games. Be back on Thursday to break down the AFC. Thanks for hanging with me. Have a great day, everybody. Oh, we got a couple things in the Carrillo. First place, congratulations to you, Jamie. Man, you're welcome. Thank you. And Coventry, Rhode Island. No, it was a friend of mine that was a builder, and they were in a subdivision, and that was a sign that he recovered, however that happened. So, yeah, but I don't know. It was in Illinois for sure. But Coventry, England, that's my roots. 49er. Yep, Ryan, 49ers defensive beast. All right, everyone, thanks for hanging with me. Have a great day, and we will talk soon.